Okay, so let's talk about March in my reading journal. March was a month for sure. I had 2 books that I DNF'd, so it was kind of put me into a reading slump, and I'm just kind of sort of now coming out of it. So let's take a look at March. So here was my opening pages in my reading journal. You can definitely see over on my calendar something that kept me going all month was Scythe and Sparrow, which is the 3rd book in the Ruinous Love trilogy. I absolutely loved that book series. I'm kind of glad that Brynne Weaver left it open to continue in that universe, because it definitely is a fun one. But I read a little bit of it each day because I knew that I was going to love it. And I knew that I would devour it if I really let myself go. So I wanted to make it last as long as possible because it was the last book in the series. Other than that, I read some short stuff. You can see I read some one-sitting reads. And then I had a couple that were, a couple days apiece. So let's take a look at the books I read. So my March books, I read 11 titles, and even though I DNF'd them, I did rate the books. So The Resurrectionist by Rae Dunlap, The Bookstore Sisters, Bookstore Wedding, and Bookstore Keepers by Alice Hoffman. It's a series of short fiction that she writes. The 4th one is actually going to come out in May. So I read the whole series that's been released so far. Then we had The Walrus by Abby Jimenez, Joe Hill's Ushers, The Doll's House by Lisa Unger, American Sherlock by Kate Winkler Dawson, Scythe and Sparrow by Brynne Weaver, Stoker's Wilde by Stephen Hopstaken and Melissa Prusi, and lastly, Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. So I DNF'd The Resurrectionist and Stoker's Wilde, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of why I did. So over here on my book stats side, we have the usual statistics that I follow. So total pages read this month, 1,479. Total minutes listened, 2,757. So mostly I was in the last 10 years of reading. And up here, you can see my genres are pretty true to what I usually read. Fantasy, horror, historical, romance, true crime. My audio length, more on the shorter side, which makes sense because I read some more shorter works this month. 4 novels and 4 short stories, 2 novellas and 1 nonfiction. Most of my ratings were 4 or 5 stars, but I did have a 3-star and a 2-star. Number of pages, again, I was on the shorter side this month, but I did have a whopper who clocked in at over 400 pages. And lastly, I read only adult books this month. So our first reading journal spread is devoted to Scythe and Sparrow, which was my book of the month. It was my favorite book this month. Then I've got my 2 DNFs together. I figured even though I didn't read them in this order, they would go okay on the page together. And lastly, I have The Walrus, which I greatly enjoyed and decided to put some collage pictures. So my book of the month was Scythe and Sparrow, which absolutely, hands down, recommend. The Ruinous Love trilogy, which is Butcher and Blackbird, Leather and Lark, and then this 3rd installment by Brynne Weaver. I want to run away to the circus. I absolutely loved this book. I loved how all 3 books converged into one, because Fionn and Rose have been in the other books. And so in this 3rd one, we got to see what happened in between the scenes they were in the other book, and what happened after the cliffhanger of their characters in book 2, Leather and Lark. So it was so good. And then at the very end, all the characters came together for like the ending, and it was just so good. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I loved the fact that Rose kept tarot cards, and so the tarot card theme was throughout the book. And then Fionn picked up the tarot cards and started to use them in a very unique way. And I loved it. I loved this book. I would definitely reread it. I can see myself definitely rereading it. I would have to say, if I had to rank the 3 books, I would do Butcher and Blackbird first, Scythe and Sparrow second, and Leather and Lark third. Simply because Leather and Lark, it took longer for the characters to really come together, you know? It was I don't know. There was something a little bit off in the pacing of that book that was not as paced as well as books 1 and 3. Books 1 and 3 were definitely engaging, action-packed, kept you moving, kept you interested. Leather and Lark was more of a much slower burn. And so I think that's why I would put that one as last. I loved it, don't get me wrong. It was great. I liked the slow burn, but ranking them, that's how I would rank them. Again, I picked 2 celebrities to represent the characters. This is Cesar Dunboy, who's from Outlander. He plays Fergus. He's actually French, not Irish, but he looks like who I thought the other 2 brothers would look like. So I think the 3 of them together look like siblings. Colin O'Donoghue from Once Upon a Time, he would be Rowan. And I'm going to say his name wrong. Ewan? I think his name's Ewan. He was the lead doctor on Night Shift. And so he was also on Merlin and a couple of other shows. Anyway, he would be Lachlan. So this is Adelaide Kane from Rain. I think she would make a good Rose. She's got that spunky, like, smirk, you know, that I think Rose has in the book. Like, she's got the vibes. This was some promotional art that was released with the book. But these 2 tarot cards were fan art that I found on Instagram. So, yeah. I thought that was really cool. I wish I could... I found it... I didn't write down the artist's name. I wish I had, because these were pretty cool. So over here, we have my 2 books that I DNF'd. So let's talk about them and get them over with. The Resurrectionist by Rae Dunlap, historical adult fiction. I really wanted to like this book. It was about body snatchers in the 19th century, so the 1800s, when medical science was having such a boom and they were learning so much about surgery and all of that stuff. And it took place in Scotland, and again, I love, UK literature and historical literature, and this book just was boring. It was so boring. It's a debut novel, and it definitely feels like one. It needs an editor. It needs stuff. The protagonist was I called him a prig. He was a prig. He was just, I did not like him. I could not connect with him. Some of the secondary characters were starting to get vaguely interesting, but just, bored to tears. I could not do it. I could see the potential. It was a great idea. I could see where it was going. The writing style was good writing. It was like the author couldn't decide if they wanted to be an adult book or a young adult book. Like, the obstacles that the characters faced I read a third of the book, and the obstacles that the characters faced were young adult-esque. They were immature obstacles that were easily conquered. They were not adult obstacles that took adult problem solving to fix. You know what I mean? Like, the voice was off. It needed an editor. Just now, I couldn't do it. It was boring. It was too boring. Again, hello, boring. Stoker's Wilde is the first book of a series. There's like 3 or 4 of them by now. But it's about Oscar Wilde and Bram Stoker joining forces and hunting monsters together. And I thought to myself, that sounds cheeky and funny, kind of like a Sci-Fi Channel TV show, like The Librarians or Haven or something, you know, kind of like that kind of vibe, you know. And I was like, I could get down with that vibe. Well, I could not get down with this vibe. This book was written like an epistolary novel. So it was written like Dracula through letters and diary entries and newspaper snippets, which, again, fascinating format. I love that kind of stuff. But it switched narrators and points of view so fast. I couldn't keep oriented in the story. And so I couldn't follow it. It was just bouncing all over the place. And I thought that it would be cheeky and fun having Oscar Wilde and Bram Stoker like real people as characters. But the way the authors portrayed them in this book, I just was like, this is so different than anything I have ever read about these two figures. I mean, I've read Oscar Wilde's letters, and the voice in this did not sound like him. And like Bram Stoker, they tried to make him a psychic. No. Bram Stoker was... His contemporaries described him as broody and sulky and emo. Like, he was not a psychic. Like, I couldn't get down with this vibe. So, it just, no. Something much happier. The Fall Risk by Abby Jimenez. Romance story, not spicy. Very funny. Very funny. Some really good punchlines and one-liners. Basically, these two neighbors who don't really know each other, they get stuck in their apartments because the landlord is doing renovations, and on a Friday, they take the stairs out. And they're like, we'll be back Monday to put them back in. Sorry. And so the boy and the girl, they're stuck in their apartments for the weekend, and they share a balcony. So they start having coffee together and talking to each other and just kind of like keeping each other occupied. And we find out that the girl is actually on the run from a stalker who has been making her life hell. And the boy has a broken ankle because he's a tree person who, arborist, there we go, arborist, a tree scientist. And so he's kind of laid up for a little while with this broken leg. And so there was some, the subplot with the stalker, there was some little dark elements and stuff, but it wasn't unsettling. It was just enough to get some action in the story and give them some like stakes to go up against. I really liked the secondary characters. I thought that they shined and were great support to the two leads. I thought it was really funny. There were a couple of lines where I actually laughed out loud. It was a good book. Like, I would definitely recommend it. So I did a half-page spread, and because I wanted to do some pictures of the vibe. This is what their world would look like on the balcony having coffee. So then we had the Alice Hoffman series I read, the Bookstore Sisters, the Bookstore Wedding, and the Bookstore Keepers. I'm not going to go into each one of them. I'm just going to do like an overview of the series. So the Gibson sisters, their parents ran a bookstore on this island in New England. And so when the parents died, they left the bookstore to the sisters. One sister left town for the lights of the big city. The other sister stayed behind and ran the bookstore. There was some friction between them, but they came back together because the sister who stayed on the island again, had like an injury and needed help running the store. So then Big City Sister comes home and kind of realizes she never should have left in the first place, you know? It was very cozy. All three of these books, like, it's like reading episodes of like A Virgin River or Gilmore Girls. They're very cozy. You like the characters. The secondary characters are very dynamic. You really get into their family story and them running this bookstore in this small town, and the boys in their lives, because of course they're boys. The fourth story comes out in May. I'm very much looking forward to it. I really wish Alice Hoffman would write a big novel of the Gibson sisters. In the town, on Brinkley Island. I really, really enjoyed it. It's like, it's cozy. It's fun. One thing though that I don't know if it's just me or if it's Alice Hoffman, but she does not develop her male characters very well. Like, her female characters are amazing, but her male characters are kind of flat and dull. I don't know if that's just like her style. Alice Hoffman wrote Practical Magic, guys. So think about Practical Magic. The sheriff was kind of flat, right? The Angeloff, he was a two-dimensional villain. The sisters, though, were amazing. They were so developed. Like, you feel like you're one of the sisters. Same with this book series. You definitely feel so connected to the female characters, but the male characters are kind of flat. So I think that might be just an Alice Hoffman thing. I don't know. Maybe it's just my observation. We'll see. Like I said, I'm looking forward to the fourth story coming out in May. So then I read a couple horror stories, novellas. One's a story, one's a novella, I think. Ushers was by Joe Hill, son of Stephen King. This story was good. Like, it was good. It was on Amazon Kindle Unlimited. And so it's these two detectives. One's like a hard-boiled, like, you know, detective. The other one's kind of more open-minded. They're interrogating this kid who escaped a school shooting, and then years later, now he has escaped a train accident. But the thing that drew them to this kid was that he warned passengers to get off the train. And it had like an Unbreakable vibe at that point. But then the open-minded detective, he starts having a conversation with this kid. And he starts to learn why the kid survived the school shooting and why he got off the train. And so this kid is claiming that there are these creatures called Ushers who appear before a big like mass casualty event, and they escort the dead to the afterlife. And this kid claims that he can see them. So that's kind of like the premise of the story. And so we're following this open-minded detective as he's trying to figure out if the kid is telling the truth or not. And it was good. Like, Joe Hill, damn, he can nail an ending like nobody else. Like, Stephen King, one of Stephen King's problems is that sometimes he flops on the ending and you're like, damn it, Stephen, why? But Joe Hill, his son, God, he can bring a story home. And this was a horror story, and it was truly creepy. There was creepy at the end. Ooh, creepy. But it was also it like brought a tear to my eye. It was touching. Like, Joe Hill has this way. I've been reading his other short stories this month because this kind of set me off on him again. But he has this way of having horror and fear, but also touch your heart and make you feel sad at the same time. Like, it just, he's so good. He gets it honest. You know, that apple didn't fall far from the tree there. But this was, I highly recommend Ushers. Again, it's free on Kindle Unlimited. Same with The Doll's House. That's another Kindle Unlimited story. This one was creepy. It was about a doll maker who Okay, start over. It was about a mother and daughter. The mother becomes engaged to this doll maker, and so they move into his house. You know, they're starting a family. Teenage daughter's like, dude, you're weird. And so stuff starts happening. There was a missing girl. We start uncovering clues of what happened to this missing girl. And the dolls in the house are creepy. And it was a good, creepy little story. It was a mystery. However, I felt like it needed to be longer and kind of slowed down a little bit. Because the creepiness, the uneasiness was almost there, you know? It was like it was almost enough. But we just needed a few more pages, maybe another chapter or so in it to get it really, truly, oh my God, mind-blowing creepy. But it was good. I enjoyed it. It was, the audiobook was okay. The mom's voice actress, she was kind of very robotic sounding, but the daughter was perfect. Like, she sounded exactly like I thought she would sound, you know? Anyway, good story, good ending. The atmosphere was what really got me with this thing. It was creepy. And so, speaking of atmosphere, let's talk some true crime. Gotta hit the true crime. Kate Winkler Dawson. This is the second book I've read by her, and I swear I love her. She is so cool. The stories that she chooses to talk about with her true crime investigations. So this one was American Sherlock, and it was about Oscar Heinrich, who is the father of modern forensic science. There's Oscar there. They called him the American Sherlock during his lifetime. He was fascinating. He was an engineer first, and then he started using his engineering skills to solve crimes. And he created the lie detector machine. He created ballistic testing. He went into and devised fingerprint analysis. So basically all of the big things that we use nowadays to determine guilt and innocence originate with him. He created them. Without him, we would not have these things. And I loved it. And, you know, each chapter was a different case that he had worked on. Very similar to, like, the case files of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Each story was a different chapter in the book. And, you know, Heinrich investigated some of the biggest scandals during this time period. He was a part of the Fatty Arbuckle rape murder case. He was a part of there was this train robbery that it was kind of like the last big Jesse James and the Sundance Kid and all that kind of stuff type of crimes. It was like the last one because they figured out, the killer. Here's actually them testing stuff in this picture. But what I thought was so fascinating was the human elements that Kate Dawson brought in. She had excerpts where he was writing letters to his son being like, son, you need to settle down. Son, you need to stop spending so much money. Son, another girlfriend? What's going on here? And it just made him so human. I really, really enjoyed this book. And I'm definitely going to read another one of her books. She's got one on the London fog in the 1950s, that there was a serial killer loose in London during the Great Smog event. And then she's got another one that I think it's about cults. I can't remember, but it recently came out, so I'm going to have to pick that one up too. She picks very interesting people to write about, and I like her storytelling, like the pacing and everything of her book. The last one I read in March was my second favorite, definitely, for the month. Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. How do I describe this book? That's how I started my review there. It was a horror fantasy with a found family. It was almost like a fairy tale that this found family was going up against domestic violence and forced pregnancy. So our protagonist girl, who is a princess, she's the third princess, the youngest one, and has been in a nunnery for most of her life. Her older sister got married off to this, prince dude, but she died within like a year of the marriage. So then the queen marries the second sister off to this same guy. And our character here, Mara, she finds out that the prince is not so princely, and he's been beating his wife and forcing her to be pregnant, and all to get an heir. And so she wants to kill the prince and release her sister before her sister, dies, like their older sister. So she goes out on this mission to stop this prince. And so she has to complete 3 tasks to earn the magical help of the dust wife. There's the dust wife. Then she has to track down her own fairy godmother. And along the way, they meet a knight who has been disgraced and is looking to regain his honor. And of course, we have to have some cool magical element. So there is a literal bone dog. His name is Bone Dog. He is a dog made of bones. It was such a good little story. Like, there were some really horrific, like, dark elements, and you're like, oh my goodness, it definitely was an adult book. But there was just this cozy, like, we can do it. We can overcome this. We can stop this evil prince. Let's do this. Go team aspect to this thing. I loved the magic. I loved the magic system. I thought the dust wife and the fairy godmother were super cool. I loved the chemistry between Mara and the knight. I thought Mara was a fantastic protagonist because she wasn't perfect. She had, she was sheltered growing up, living in a convent, learning from the nuns, and yet she learned things that helped them along the way. There were parts of it that infuriated me because I'm a feminist, and I was just so mad. But then the way they all came together at the end to stop the prince and lead the charge against him, it was so good. Like, I highly recommend this book. T. Kingfisher, love. I think it's a she. I think I read somewhere that T. Kingfisher's a woman. But they have a knack of creating these found families that you want to be a part of this group. You want to hang out with these people. The other series that I'm thinking of is her Sworn Soldier series, What Moves the Dead, What Feasts at Night. Those 2 books have a similar setup of found family, of these eccentric characters who come together for a greater good. I loved this book. It was creepy. It was a fairy tale for adults. It really was. And part of me wants a sequel. The other part of me is like, this book is perfect. So, again, like, I always loved T. Kingfisher, and I would definitely recommend this one. So, that's March. That was the 11 books I read in March. Here they are again. Been in kind of a reading slump this April. So I've been reading some Joe Hill short stories. And also, I just finished Their Vicious Darling by Nikki St. Croix, which, again, is one of my favorite book series. This is The Vicious Lost Boys. This is book 3, and I've got book 4 pulled. I just wanted some easy reading and to revisit some series and and authors that I know and love this month. I don't know why, but for some reason in April, I always get into some kind of reading slump, and I'm just like, no, I don't want to read that. I don't want to read this. So I end up reading either an author I enjoy or revisiting series that I haven't read before. Books in a series that I haven't read before. So we'll see. We'll see how the rest of April turns out. Thank you so much for flipping through my reading journal with me. I hope maybe I showed you something that you might like to read as well. And, happy reading. I'll see you next month.